Hello, everybody. It's great to be here one more time today. My name is Gary Fowler. I'm the CEO, president, founder of GST Venture Studios. I'm a serial entrepreneur with 17 unicorns under the belt, 17 companies under the belt, two unicorns. I was on the original management team at Click Software, which is sold to Salesforce for 1.35 billion, and also Eva.ai. I'd like to welcome you each to the premiere edition of GSD Presents Longevity and the Future of Aging, the show where I explore how breakthrough science, artificial intelligence, and next generation medicine are transforming how long and how well we live. I'm your host, Gary Fowler, CEO, founder of the company. At GSD, we work with innovators around the world building technology to scale globally and solving some of humanity's biggest challenges. One of the most profound opportunities of our time is the science of longevity, extending not just lifespan, but health span. Today's guest and my friend is someone working at the intersection of AI, neuroscience, and medical imaging, where data is becoming one of the most powerful tools for predicting, preventing disease. Join us today is Robert Lauritzen, CEO and co-founder of CEREBRIU. Robert is an international life science and technology executive with more than 25 years with experience across medtech, pharma, and IT, building global operations across Europe, the United States, and Asia. His company is pioneering the use of artificial intelligence applied to brain MRI scans, transforming imaging from diagnostic snapshot into a powerful predictive tool that can help clinicians detect neurological conditions earlier and ultimately improve patient outcomes. Today, we're going to explore how AI is transforming brain imaging and what this means for the longevity science. So, with that, I'd like to bring my friend on board. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Gary. Good to see you.
Good to see you again. You spent more than 2 decades across life sciences, med tech, and IT. What originally drew you to the intersection of technology and healthcare innovation?
Well, I mean, what we were doing, what was the question? I didn't hear the question.
You
Sorry
spent
about
more
that.
than 2 decades across life sciences, med tech, and IT.
Yeah,
What was originally drew you to the intersection of technology and healthcare innovation?
yeah. Well, I was as a young age grew up with a father who worked in the dental industry. He passed away with cancer, and I was just intently focused on helping healthcare do better. So I started on very early building advanced dental medical equipment, sort of a dental clinic in a backpack, and went into pharma, worked with that to find avenues to build technologies that could help the development of drugs and getting drugs cost efficiently out to consumers or to patients. And now I've converged into looking at the diagnostic workflow and look at how we can help more patients get diagnosed in time to help them survive and with as much quality of life as possible for as long as possible.
Robert, for my listeners unfamiliar with the company, how would you describe what CEREBRIU does in simple terms?
Well, CEREBRIU is a software company. We're an AI company that is building a future where the modality MRI systems become autonomous, can be operated by low-skilled techs and do the perfect examination or the right examination the first time with just a few clicks. So this requires advanced clinical intelligence on the machine that can detect certain clinical features of whoever is on the table and modify how to best scan that patient and with the patient history and provide the output that enables the radiologist to do a differential diagnosis. So we're basically wrapping the radiology workflow into the machine and making the machine capable of doing most of the job itself.
Brain MRIs are widely used in medicine today. What are the current limitations of how they are analyzed?
Well, if you look at it, it's a workflow that comes from maybe unspecific symptoms. It could be a headache. It could be some diffuse symptoms in the brain. So the physician refers you to a scan. You get scanned, and typically a wide spread of scans spend maybe an hour or 45 minutes in the machine, and then eventually days or weeks later, a radiologist will look at it, look at the clinical data, look at the patient history, look at the images, and then interpret and read and report on it back to the physician. So this whole chain of work can take weeks, and it's quite often broken. So sometimes the physician would need to recall the patient, or the physician ends up with, or the radiologist ends up with way too much data. So what we're looking at is basically, can we, at the point of where data is created, can we actually recognize what the clinician is looking for and make sure that we do as little as possible to get as much information, relevant information as possible, to make sure that we have focus on the patients that have particular findings that can be diagnosed, and to remove all the currently superfluous information that's being generated by these sort of widespread scans that are happening today. So this is a very different way of looking at that journey, and we can do that because of the developments the past few years with artificial intelligence that's able to tie in these clinical signals, the data across with the patients and the modality, and help provide that information to the operators and the medical doctors in real time. That's the substantial change that we're leveraging.
You know, one of the things, so my AI is starting to come back with some things now. She wants me to start to ask you. But, you know, when you look at like the neurological disorders like Alzheimer's, stroke, and dementia, if we take a more of an integrated approach where detection is the first step of it, and what she's saying here is many times it happens late in the progression, but we've got to go down through and if we have an integrated approach where we do things like stem cell or cerebral Lauritzen to try to be able to combat those early, we can have a profound impact. So why has detection historically been so difficult, Robert, and done late? Why has that happened?
Well, I guess it's back to the core premise of our mission in existence, is really providing access. So if you imagine there are like 60,000 MRI scanners and they're all spending 45 minutes to scan your brain, that's just a very limiting factor to how many people can actually go and get a scan. So to detect early, you need to move into the screening phase. And the challenge is the modality is so expensive and these imaging procedures so long and complicated that screening is not really a viable option. So what we want to do is really convert the system into a screening first technology. And based on that initial early information, which is not enough to diagnose, but is enough to detect, to enable us to move towards just a few minutes on the table. And then if there's something to look at, like early symptoms for neurodegenerative disease like dementia, then we can start double clicking into what's actually going on with the patient. And this is in a very few cases. So it's not if you're 100 patients, only maybe 1 or 2 would have something worthwhile looking into, or maybe 5, right? Depend on the patient population. So I think this is a huge opportunity for us to leverage modern technology, embed it into the system, and allow the system to do this screening that will enable us to expand access to a lot more people, and enable this, society, from a society perspective, to move into a screening opportunity for early detection, so we can start this kind of therapy, longevity therapy.
What kinds of patterns or biomarkers can AI detect that humans might miss?
Well, I think you can tip. So what you can tip, I mean, there can be all sorts of radiomics, or all sorts of biomarkers that are very subtle that humans may miss. Typically, the barrier for human is that they're under duress, especially for acute conditions. But they have from a workflow perspective, they're just overloaded. So if you imagine, the more your pile is growing, the less time you spend, and you're always pressured to operationally perform more and more. And right now, we're seeing double-digit growths in volume of procedures per year on year, but we're not seeing sort of anything, if not even maybe a reduction in capacity. So if you're supposed to work more and more, obviously you have less and less time per patient. So what we're doing is making sure that our technology is at least as good as the expert in the field, but then we're able to expand compute and do everything in due time and don't miss. So we don't have this gradual reduction in quality and error rate that potentially is going up because of the work pressure. And we don't have sort of cognitive variance during the day, and we don't have the same level of interreader variability. So a lot of these subtle findings can be quite difficult to consistently agree on between clinicians. So that's a classic dilemma. So what we're looking at is not necessarily to see everything that cannot be detected, but really to ensure a good, stable platform that can see things that can be unclear, where we can reduce the variability in what we see, and where we can shorten the time and avoid sort of fatigue and all the human factors that can have radiologists miss subtle findings.
How does CEREBRIU ensure accuracy and clinical reliability when deploying AI into healthcare environments, right? Because you got to, those are two pieces. How do you determine whether or not that's happening or not?
Well, this is a hugely complicated field. One of the ones that are being discussed quite massively in the field of radiology and AI is the whole sort of governance and orchestration and what the regulatory bodies call post-market surveillance. How do you tie all that up? So there are various platforms that enable sort of the continual monitoring and sort of avoiding the shift or the increase of hallucinations, you can say in a popular language. And what we do is we do a lot of clinical validation studies and a lot of different cohorts of patients around the world to look for generalizability, but also look for bias and to remove that. And obviously now that we're deploying more and more live, we will be looking at orchestrating this kind of post-market surveillance in the engagement with our clients. Right? So this should tie the knot. But this is certainly something, a field that is under development and where there are sort of platform players that enable the connection into sort of review of past findings and past AI signals to see and make sure that the technology is not sort of shifting or wandering off in some weird direction at a particular site.
So my AI is coming back and said that CEREBRIU is really a longevity tool rather than just a diagnostic tool, and saying that neurological signals appear years before symptoms emerge. So now she wants me to ask you this. She said, could routine brain imaging eventually become part of preventative longevity medicine similar to blood tests today?
I totally believe so. So I do agree.
And Robert, it has to happen, right? It's not something that should happen. It has to happen. It's got to be available to everyone.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and this is back to access, right? So if it's a $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 scan and it takes 45 minutes, there's just there's a massive bottleneck. So you have to transform the approach so you can enable sort of screening towards 1 or 2 minutes. You can't do that in CT because it's radiation technology, right? You can do it in MRI because it's non-invasive, and screening isn't without contrast. So the point would be we want to drive this and enable this early detection so we can improve also longevity. Like we can capture signals maybe in conjunction with blood tests for early dementia already starting potentially detectable in the 30s instead of in the 60s. That can massively change the potential therapy and quality of life and adjusted life for that kind of patient, right?
How might AI help identify biological aging of the brain versus chronological aging?
I'm sure it can be done. It's not a field that we are currently focusing on, but I guess sort of like bone age, you're looking at anatomical features. We can certainly see the balance between white and gray matter in the brain, and there's indication of age simply by the shift of volumes in those two sort of main masses in the brain. Whether we can tie that into, it's actually an interesting thought, just to say, okay, from a longevity perspective, can we, and this is a long-term longitudinal study, can we see a shift in early detection and then early preventive medicine, like longevity therapies that you've written about, by applying those early on and see a gradual, prolonged, slower slope towards an older brain. And I'm
Well,
pretty sure that will happen. Yeah.
wait, I mean, I'm living proof.
Yeah. What did you get a scan before and after?
Well, I
That's the
mean, I had my biomarkers checked before, so before and after, and so. Well, I'm not trying to promote myself on this thing, but I mean significantly. So my chronological age versus my biological age are dramatically different, about 20 years actually right now. So
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I mean, and for sure, I mean, from a full body perspective, that's certainly possible and feasible, and there's more and more evidence around that. I think the particularly the brain age and that sort of brain aging technology is actually an interesting. It would probably be more than just structural brain MRI. So you need more like functional and other signals in there. But I'm pretty sure
this integrated approach, right? You're
yeah.
part of the integrated approach, and we need to look at it as an integrated system, and we're not. That's part of the problem with medicine. We got all these islands of automation, all these islands of diagnostics, but it's got to be integrated and tied together. And that's one of the beauties of some of these advanced AI models, being able to all tie it together as one. Remember, Aristotle said, and so did the Germans, right? The sum of the parts equal the whole, Gestalt. But that's really where we are, and that's where Cerebro, because early detection means that you can have a higher probability of being able to cure it and take care of it before it's a problem, right?
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. I think this is the dream, right? That you can go down, I mean, potentially to the mall, you can get a 5-minute scan, and then you can sort of get a notification whether or not you should actually seek physician, get medical help, and get a further examination, right? Because this would be completely non-invasive, safe with a sort of a low pay grade kind of individual, and you could get early signals of it could be a tumor or some other thing that could be malignant that you want to be investigating, right? So and looking at what is actually significant and what is potentially dangerous and what is just like anything else. There can always be something that's not really something you should worry about, because we all have that around as well, right?
I mean, and the AI could go down through, just like we did with my wife, to go down through and tell you what course of action to take in order to have the highest probability of a positive outcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
You go down through, so so this is my AI asking a question, because here's what she says. She said, hospitals and healthcare systems could be resistant to AI-assisted imaging platforms for all kinds of different reasons. How do you deal with that? Is it a problem? Are you there? Did you hear me, Robert?
Did I lose you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Just blinked. Something about hospital.
Yeah. So hospitals and healthcare systems could react negatively to AI-assisted imaging platforms for all kinds of different reasons. Is that a problem? Are they interested in these systems, or are they resistant to it? They could think they're taking their jobs.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously there's always that element around it, and certainly with the buzz around AI, there's a lot of discussions of whether any one of us will have a job in a few years. To be honest, I think the initial fear reaction passed many years ago. I think we're now in a how do we scale this reliably in systems so that we can consistently see improved workflow efficiency, that we can see the benefits that sort of that you're setting out to do with introducing the technology. But we're looking at a system meltdown, right? If you look at radiology and you have a 10+% year-on-year growth, and without people catching up, if you don't have technology to help, the only thing that you're going to get is an increasing burnout rate. And eventually the system will collapse because it's a complete meltdown.
Well, I mean, you get the burnout rate on one side and you get the costs escalating on the other side. And those factors are going to, I mean, the people either won't get treated, or they won't get treated because they don't have enough staff to be able to do it, or they won't get treated because they don't have enough money for the insurance to be able to do it in places like the US. And so one of the how important, you talk about the workflows, how important is integration with hospital systems and their workflows to make sure that they adopt the technology?
I think it's absolutely critical. It's a pivotal factor. You cannot really just introduce technologies that's not integrated into existing workflows, because nobody wants more screens or more devices. They have to figure out how to use in combination with their existing complex plethora of technologies. So I think that's a critical aspect of also our strategy to be on device, because we can deploy and we've done that now in Belgium and Germany in less than 20 minutes on a scanner. So that's complete end-to-end deployment. There's no IT barriers. There's nothing. It's just we get there, we install, it's up and running, it's part of the device. It's used in the environment that the user is normally looking at and working with, and it looks completely like they're used to. And we actually, when we demo this in shows and stuff, we ask typically the audience to come and demo it for us, because it's so intuitively easy that they don't really need any training and understanding. Once they understand what it does, they can just operate it because it's in the environment that they're used to. And I think this is absolutely key, and one of the main barriers for a lot of the solutions that are out there is scaling deployments on various platforms and getting it all connected. And that's just a nightmare. It takes typically more than a year just to get through IT.
How do you navigate the intersection of clinical validation, regulatory approvals, and commercialization?
That was a broad question. Yeah, so I mean, obviously, regulatory and commercial are two different things. So we look at the regulatory clearance as sort of the license to operate, but it doesn't really encourage anyone to buy. So in the clinical validation, typically is also first addressing the regulatory problem. So we want to make sure that medicine is safe and nobody gets hurt. It gets hurt, and it's most likely valuable and value adding, but not really necessarily from a financial perspective, or maybe at least from a clinical question perspective. So that's the regulatory part, and then you say, okay, but why would somebody buy it? And this is the commercial part, right, where we're looking at return on investment. It's reducing the complexity of day-to-day operation. It's reducing risk. It's improving patient flow, like triaging patients, making sure we flag those with critical findings, so they're not waiting in weeks in the work list until somebody gets them, because it's just first in, first out. I mean, those aspects where you can convert that into more throughput or reduced costs incurred on the DRG of inpatients, or whatever component it does, that translate into something not only the clinicians understand, but also the CFO of the company, of the healthcare system, or the payers, or whoever is interested in actually sponsoring and paying for this kind of technology.
Do you think AI-driven imaging eventually will help us understand how lifestyle, environment, and genetics impact brain aging?
I think we have only just started scratching the surface of what this kind of technology can get into, especially when we start looking at the multimodal universe, which is ultra complex. There's just so many. I mean, if you talk to a cardiologist, they have somewhere in the 20 to 30 sources of information. That's, let's say, modes of information. And over time, it's just extremely complicated. So imagine what AI can do in grasping that complexity with ease. I think this is where we're only scratching the surface of the potential, from drug development to diagnostic space and therapies, and combining it all. I think there's an endless opportunity. And what we want to avoid along the way is that we apply it through technology which is harmful, which is why we love MRI, because it's not invasive, so we can actually scan early, we can scan children, we can scan and screen people on an ongoing basis to make sure we capture things once we can see it.
If you could give one piece of advice to founders building at the intersection of AI and healthcare, what would it be?
Don't raise too little and have patience and resilience in your vision. So if you have something that excites clinicians, make sure that you have adequate funding and financial backing and patience, because it takes longer than it does just to build a tech company. You can't, generate revenue in months. It takes years. You have to go through the excruciating hurdle of, clearance potentially, if at least if it's met in the medical device field. And hospitals don't adopt overnight. There's no wildfire adoption. There are just so many more barriers. So, make sure you have enough money and make sure that you're patient. I think that those are the absolutely survival important things, but there's so many dimensions to it.
Well, I mean, what you're doing is open up a new window into longevity and a better quality of life. And so by early detection, we can take care of challenges before they're vast problems. So it's fantastic. Robert, this has been a fascinating discussion. The idea that AI could transform brain scans from diagnostic images into predictive longevity tools is incredibly powerful. If we can detect neurological disease earlier and intervene sooner, we may fundamentally change the trajectory of aging itself. And, as you know, from my standpoint, the longevity, I am the experiment. And there's so much that we can do to change our lives. Somebody said to me, well, I don't want to spend the money. And I came back to it and said, but if you're dead, it doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah.
He just bought a brand new car too. It's you need a car. I don't know. I would be putting money in yourself, but
Yeah.
Fascinating. And you've been at this journey a while. You've had a lot of success. What are the future? What's in the near term? What are you going to be doing next with the company?
Well, obviously our current platform with Siemens distribution, we're looking to distribute that into other platforms as well. And then of course looking into deploying some of this great advancements there in the AI field for further degree of automation. So I think what you'll see over the next year or so will be a colossal leap in our roadmap, because we can accelerate things that we haven't been able to do with a traditional sort of approach on technology. So super excited times for us and what we're doing in this space.
No,
and
it's
of course, moving into other body parts in the brain. It's not the only thing that ages and not the only thing that's at risk. So I think, cardio and any other body part can be impacted, and we need to be able to support it all.
Well, you're on a fascinating journey, and it's great to be part of this journey with you. And at GSD, we really appreciate it. And any closing thoughts, and how do people get a hold of you?
Well, you can reach out through my mail, which is rl@cerebru.com, or just link on LinkedIn. And I think it's been a pleasure as always. I think GSD and your mission in getting stuff done is very inspiring. And of course, I think the whole longevity angle, which is ultimately what we're looking for. How can we improve the quality of life and the extent of that life? It is all the core of what we do. So we're super aligned on that, and I hope that more people are more encouraged by healthcare than other industries that are hot at these days, and don't focus on that, but focus on what's most important, which is a long, healthy life for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. And democratizing like you're doing now is critically important. Getting out to people. I was in Africa recently, and imagine, 1.2 billion people in Africa. Imagine what possibilities are. So it's great seeing what you're doing. I want to thank everybody for joining our premiere episode at GSD Presents Longevity. And my name is Gary Fowler, and I'm your host. Stay happy, stay safe, and stay healthy. And I'll be back to you again soon with another exciting edition. Robert, if you want to stay on for a few minutes after the show, we can talk. And thank you, everybody.
Thanks.